So I'm making this video in response to the most recent video made by Tactical Bacon Productions about studios starting to kill off video games. The idea behind this is that you can purchase something that's like any video game, something that might be an always online video game, something that in any way requires a server, but if the studio closes down or decides to completely stop the service to an online game, then they can just pull the plug and you may not be able to play it ever again. The famous example that Tactical Bacon used was the video game The Crew, owned by Ubisoft. Now, Ubisoft has also come under fire recently for articles like these, which has also prompted memes like these. But this also creates a very serious problem that quite a lot of people are going to be finding themselves in. It's not just about video games that will become inaccessible to you and I, even after we paid for them. I mean, what would I do, for example, after all the money I spend playing and paying for Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, or even Elden Ring, and all of a sudden From Software turned around and says, except no one will be able to play these games anymore, and will simply yank them from the shelves. Now, to be honest, this really shouldn't be a thing for From Software to do, because you can play all of these games offline, and theoretically there's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing so. But what if they just theoretically decided to stop people playing these games altogether? There's absolutely no way that From Software or even Bandai could even do about this, so they'll obviously refrain from doing stuff like this. It only makes sense because there's no way they'd be able to get away with it. But that brings me on very comfortably to the topic of Activision Blizzard. Now, I will say is that from 2017 all the way until roughly the middle of 2021, I was an avid player and lover of the video game Overwatch, a first-person, always online game which involved teams of 6 heroes trying to fight each other, virtually inspired by the video game Team Fortress 2, and it was a game, an original IPO from Blizzard that actually garnered a lot of hype, a lot of praise, and an awful amount of merchandising, fan comics, fan support, a new esports league, and this was just breathing new life into Activision Blizzard as, well, we all knew it. That was until the announcements of things like Overwatch 2, and through things like adding in characters who were completely overpowered, and then Activision Blizzard was starting to trickle out content on a very, very irregular basis. You could go from things like not having a new character for nearly a year at a time, to this new hero lock scheme that literally forbade you playing from an entire character, their recently released character, for an entire week. And there's a reason why you don't see things like hero lock anymore, because the developers probably turned around and pretty much realized this was not a good idea. The idea why Blizzard and Activision decided to do this is because the game had a history of being very unbalanced, that there were loads of characters who had abilities that were virtually broken and could make some teams in certain situations nigh on invincible. Hence the horrendous creation of the GOATS meta, which would usually involve Brigitte, Reinhardt, Diva, Zarya, Lucio, Ana, or another hero in particular. It might have been another support hero. So essentially you got 3 supports and 3 tanks, because they could do just as much damage as any DPS character, and they could storm any character or any team with the right level of combinations. And it took Blizzard quite a bit of time to actually rectify these problems, from taking away Brigitte's ability to stun Reinhardt's shield so it would be disabled so that your opposing Reinhardt can use Earth Shatter, to just all sorts of tiny little things. From, you may remember in 2019 there was a brief period where they made Reaper's damage output extremely high, and they also made his passive ability, in which he can heal himself, extremely high. This idea was to cut down on the fact that it could take Reaper an exceptional amount of time to damage anybody, as well as being able to do as much healing to keep himself occupied. But in practice, it didn't really work out all that well. And then there came the situation involving Overwatch 2. We were promised, a story. We were promised PvP. We were promised a very, very storied and very, very team-focused gameplay. The sort of thing that gave it a bit more story, more almost akin to a lot of those storied missions you got in the Archives event. These would be annual events in which there'll be story missions in which you can complete with 4 players. But ever since, I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2020, where Overwatch decided they were not going to release a brand new Archives mission, except it would just be a rehash of 3 of the previous missions, and the only thing slightly different is new cosmetics and skins, which didn't really win over people that well, unfortunately. And basically, you were playing the game, but you were just playing the same game with very little changes, and people were crying out for more changes. Otherwise, the lack of involvement or investment would just ruin the game, because who else would be wanting to come and play it? And then when Overwatch 2 came around, there was the controversial news about teams of 6 being reduced to teams of 5. Quite a lot of people were very, very curious about this, because people were wondering, well, if it meant 2 DPS, 2 supports, and 1 tank, how useful would characters like D.Va be, and how optimal characters like Winston would be in certain situations. And trust me, Blizzard and Activision have done quite a lot of meddling over the years to try and compensate for the fact that some teams were just using the GOATS meta just so everybody could win. But very few of these things actually stuck around, because eventually what would happen is that even in the 2v2 meta of Overwatch, people would just be able to work their way around this with heroes and characters that in any scenario would have just been as formidable as the GOATS meta as we once knew it. And then when Overwatch 2 came around, the truths started to trickle out as well. And it was at this point where quite a lot of people were starting to leave the game altogether. People immediately saw that Overwatch 2 was literally created just for the sake of adding in a battle pass, and I've only played roughly 5 matches of Overwatch 2 for myself, and I'm just going to share from my experience that this was nearly 2 years ago when I started playing Overwatch 2, and I've almost not been back ever since. I found the game needlessly complicated in the matters of making things a 5v5 match. There wasn't really any desire whatsoever for there to be a 5v5 match, and there was no desire to hang around a business or even a game that was consistently taking stuff away, replacing it with things that nobody wanted, and deciding not to promise on things that people were curious to see how they would play out. It's kind of shameless in many such ways how this all played out, and the curious enough side of this is that I've not even been around Overwatch 2 for nearly 2 whole years, and I haven't even seen if there's been any other news that's been breaking out. Whether or not it's with new characters, whether it's through buffs or controversial things that Activision Blizzard has been up to. Oh, and yes, they certainly have. Or even if new characters like Lifeweaver are even any good, or whether it's even still worth playing characters like Wrecking Ball, which is a character that I'm still not entirely sure how you play as, because, well, like I said, I played Overwatch a lot back in the day, and I was mostly a tank main, to say the least. But if there was one character I literally would almost never ever want to play unless I absolutely had to, would be Wrecking Ball, because I still don't understand how this guy works. I'm just putting it out there. Sigma, understandable. Zarya, very optimal. Diva had difficulty with, but could use him if I needed to. Roadhog was my go-to. Winston was slightly less of a go-to than I wanted to. Reinhardt was just the GOAT. And as far as my knowledge is concerned, that's just about it. Once again, this is just down to the fact that these were the characters I played. Oh, and Orisa was useful in certain situations. Although, with that being said, when I tried to play Overwatch 2, when I had to go up against Orisa, I found her to be so damn overpowered that I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't even get my head around about how Junker Queen was supposed to work either. So, and also why the hell they made Doomfist a tank instead of a DPS, I don't understand either. Yes, Doomfist was very hit or miss depending on certain situations, but when you can get it right, he is nigh on invincible. But that's just me talking. This is somebody who hasn't been near the game in 2 years, so maybe my opinions need a little bit of refurbishment. But what does all this have to do with games dying off? Well, it's because of the fact that if developers or studios or publishers are willing to pull away certain games because they may be underperforming, or they just decide that's it, then what's stopping developers from just deciding of their own will that they can make the experience for other players worse, but will still introduce things like Battle Pass or more loot boxes, or say that you've got to pay a monthly subscription just to play the game? There's nothing stopping a developer from just doing things that people don't like, but know that they'll continue to do just to play the game. But unfortunately, again, that all of these things backfire, and it's just a way of alienating more people when you do things like, oh, I don't know, release a AAA video game at full price, and then they decide that if you want the actual ending for the game, you have to pay extra more money just for a DLC which includes the true ending, aka Azura's Wrath. I've never played Azura's Wrath, but I don't think I really ever want to, knowing that I have to pay extra just to get the entire game. It's a bit like it's like purchasing a meal which consists of like a rump steak, blue cheese, garlic butter, and some fries, but they only bring the garlic butter and the steak out, and they say you have to pay a subcharge for the fries. No, I want my fries. If it said on the menu that you get the fries with the meal, then I expect it with the fries. Then that is not even up for debate, if you ask me. And the similar case goes exactly with what I've been talking about right now, is that if developers are willing to pull away games at the expense of players who already paid money, then who's to say that even at the expense of players who are playing the game and who will still buy little cosmetics, and even if the game does well, then what is the point of trying to make the experience for people worse, even though they are so cocksure and confident that people are still going to be playing their games? There's no win or lose with some studios about what they can and cannot do, because if it's down to them, then they'll be the ones who decide what to do. And this is the sort of thing that we even need to make a bigger splash about, because if they're stopping, like I said, if there's nothing stopping a developer from just pulling the plug, then what's to stop people from just making things but making them even worse? And there were problems with Overwatch before Overwatch 2 came around, don't get me wrong, but there were some very simple things that they could have done to have fixed things. Like, for example, let's say Route 66, and you know how it was just like an escort mission where you took one payload and you took it to 3 separate checkpoints? Well, here's an idea. Literally take Route 66, but you also make a King of the Mountain style match for Route 66, or you bring in a hybrid map. And you could do this with the other levels as well. Just small things like that where you're not really changing that much, but you could also just add in things that will make the game feel a bit more expansive without having to bring in new characters every 4 to 6 months. That's maybe the other problems as well, is that the inconsistency in new characters was something that was kind of a little bit testing. I mean, if I was to start my own studio and to start up my own video game, I did have a very strong philosophy about what I would do, about like new releases and stuff like that. And it was something I wanted to square up from day one. But what can I say? From a lack of experience, may suggest that some things are not nearly as practical as at first sight. But there's also not many things practical in making the experience worse for no other reason than just to make a quick buck from people. So what exactly can be done? We know about things like the WoW Classic servers, but why not just make a classic server for, I don't know, Overwatch, or just make the classic mode? So bring that back, and you can still have Overwatch 2, but, just give people the choice. Which, again, this is an idea that to me sounded so obvious, I wonder why this wasn't even something that we could just have in the first place. Well, I know I may suggest the idea of just to make a quick buck, but I wonder if there's a slightly more confusing and slightly more problematic answer that is basically just to make a quick buck, but worded slightly differently. But some things will remain a mystery, and this is unfortunately not even the first time we've heard about this. Anyone who's ever known the video game company EA, Electronic Arts, will certainly attest to this. And I've heard about some incredibly scummy things that Electronic Arts have done in the past. It was even on one of these occasions when, about 6 years ago, I was in a professional creative class. The object of these classes was that people from the industry, from big studios and big departments, would come in and they would talk about their experiences and would also give out legal advice to us university students so that studios wouldn't take advantage of our hard work, and what would happen if they did things that were egregiously outside of the contracts we signed with them. And I remember asking at one point, well, why don't these people ever form a union if they're being taken advantage of? And I was told immediately that they would never allow it. And I kept asking, this was in context to the production of the video game L.A. Noire, and I kept asking, well, who are they? And nobody seemed to know. And you've got to also wonder what this also means from the point of view of the employees, the programmers, the animators, the artists, the storyboard artists, the voice actors, the voice actress, the test animators. What does it mean to them when they're just following orders, and maybe they even know for themselves that it's not exactly good for business, but are powerless to say anything different? But what can you say, ladies and gentlemen, and what can I do apart from this isn't exactly new, and unfortunately this is not something that's just going to stop just because people are upset at big studios deciding what they can and cannot do. At the end of the day, if you want some level of change, if you want things to be effective, then you've just got to do what you've got to do. You've got to raise awareness, or maybe this is something that I should have done a long time ago and actually brought my idea of a video game, an always online experience, to light about what it involves, what makes it unique from the competition, and why it's the sort of thing that I want to continue. Even if, interest in it wanes, there are ways in which you can revive a player base in which you don't have to con people into purchasing battle passes or thinking that just because you got cosmetics means that your experience is still all the while more valuable. What's more valuable, ladies and gentlemen, is that people pay your money and you enjoy the experience you get. Sometimes you get what you pay for, and sometimes if you pay money to people who deceive you, like Activision Blizzard or even Electronic Arts, then, well, you get exactly what you deserve. So there's that. So it's not just about publishers and developers trying to kill off games. It's also about publishers and developers who are shortchanging you from something you are perfectly entitled to. Especially because, well, as someone who owned Overwatch long before Overwatch 2 came into effect, I had no say whatsoever about whether or not I just wanted to keep Overwatch. But all I have to say with that is that it's, well, over. and out. It says something as well when even those NSFW artists and animators who use Overwatch characters, they're probably living the dream because they are using their talents and not giving any money whatsoever to Blizzard. They are living the dream. And probably the people even most impassionate about what they do because they know that they can't be touched in one way or another. And I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care and bye-bye for now.